Please share the information provided in this video. Always remember that a crucial part of removing a person's confusion is understanding his or her unique source of it. Now, C.S. Lewis put forward an argument to defend that Jesus Christ is God. And it goes a little something like this: liar, lunatic, Lord. So they want you to he wants you to do a process of elimination and say, was he a liar? No, that doesn't add up. Was he a lunatic? No, that doesn't add up. Therefore, he must be a Lord. And commonly today, many respond to the liar, lunatic, Lord argument by saying that C.S. Lewis and the argument leave some options off the table. So they don't claim that Jesus is a liar or a lunatic, but they also don't claim that he's a Lord. They usually will take either what's called the legendary hypothesis or the mythicist hypothesis. So it's liar, lunatic, Lord, legend, or myth. You may be asking, what's the difference between a legend and a myth? A legend starts with an actual figure and gets slowly embellished over time, and slowly builds up and becomes more and more elaborate, and more is added to it over time. A myth starts with almost nothing or previous made-up stories, and is just something that people make up and tell, and eventually it's been around for so long no one really knows if it was true or not. So you've got a lot of people out there who say that Jesus Christ, never existed, or whoever did exist is just so far removed, that guy had no effect on the myth at all. It's just so dramatically changed. And then the legendary hypothesis, starts with a real kernel of truth, but then embellishes it. So the legendary hypothesis would say that there existed, a real man, Jesus, but he slowly miracles were added, and eventually it got to him resurrecting, and eventually it got to him being God, and it increased in those stages. The problem with the legendary hypothesis is that there's not a lot of time for the legend to develop from when Jesus probably lived to when we have the first writings, and when the legend appears to be already pretty fully developed. So, in other words, we're pretty sure on the dating for 1 Corinthians, written by Paul around AD 55. And so, if Jesus ascended into heaven sometime around 30 or 33 AD, that's about 20 years. And sometimes the legendary hypothesis people will say that, you look in 1 Corinthians, Jesus is just like a moral teacher. And then you get later, Mark is written, around 90, 100 AD. Like, a lot of miracles have been added, but there's no resurrection. And then you get the other Gospels being written on later. And then you get John written, like, much later. And by this point, they say John's written by like 150 AD, and by this point Jesus is God. Now the problem with this, there are just a few simple facts. First of all, 1 Corinthians 15 clearly is a story about the resurrection. So I don't understand sometimes how people will just say that there's nothing in the New Testament other than the Gospels that involves Jesus doing miracles, because it's clearly a story about the resurrection and the witnesses to the resurrection right there in AD 55. Furthermore, we're not so sure that the Gospels were written so late, because the entire New Testament was basically an argument that Jesus replaced the temple sacrifice system that the Jews had had for so long. So God had created this Jewish nation, and Jesus comes in and says that he is the ultimate fulfillment of that he is, the Messiah of the Jews, and the Jewish temple system was just looking forward to him. The book of Hebrews goes through this extensively. But the temple was destroyed in AD 70, and it's hard to pill to swallow that the New Testament writers would not mention the destruction of the Jewish temple, when that pretty much would prove that they were right. So, I mean, that would be like their ultimate argument to prove what they're saying. Like, see, God sent this foreign army to destroy this temple. In addition to that, you've got Peter and Paul, and we're fairly sure that they died in AD 64. So what that means is, why doesn't the Bible mention the destruction of the temple or the death of two of the main people who wrote it and the main characters in the story? Probably because it was written before that happened. So yeah, it's probably, there's a good chance the New Testament was written all before AD 70, probably before 64. In addition to that, when they say the Gospel of Mark does not mention the resurrection, that's garbage. There is a passage at the end of the Gospel of Mark which we're pretty sure was a later add-on, but even without the later add-on, the story ends with the women coming to the tomb and finding it empty. Angels there telling them, "He is risen, go tell everybody." And I don't see, like, that's not necessarily no resurrection. There's an empty tomb. The body's, he's risen. So, not he went to the afterlife, So, there's that. And then, really John, whoever wrote John, claims to be an eyewitness to the whole thing. And Luke claims, when he wrote Luke and when he wrote Acts, to have not been an eyewitness. He claims that he investigated thoroughly the eyewitnesses. In addition to that, the story reads very boring. It doesn't read like a legend. Like, for example, in a legend you have, like, when Buddha's born, he comes out of his mother's womb and she's under, like, this big tree, and he's like no pain for her, I think, and he starts walking immediately, and lotus blooms pop up with every step that he takes right out of the womb. And when Jesus is born, the government orders a census. And there's some miraculous stuff, but there's also a lot of really excruciatingly boring details. It reads much more like an actual account. And that's one of the things about it that needs to be taken into account. Alright. In addition to that, the apostles of Jesus, if they did embellish the story of Jesus and make it into a legend to build it up over those 20 years, why did they not make themselves anything other than the such losers they are in the Gospels and in the story? Because, when you get to Acts and stuff, they're, like, awesome. But, like, you go back to Luke, which was so Luke wrote Luke and then he wrote Acts. Like, back in Luke, the apostles are all big losers. They're terrible at everything. And they even betray Jesus. They don't have faith in him. They get the wrong idea all the time. If they're making up a story, why didn't they make themselves out to be awesome? Furthermore, the women are the witnesses to the most important event of all history, the resurrection. They're the first witnesses. If you were making up a story, you would have put men as the primary witnesses of this, because women were pretty much not accepted as doing anything but just being silly and not telling the truth. The Greeks actually believed, and the New Testament was written in Greek, they believed that women were created by Zeus as a punishment on mankind, with their pointless, inquisitive silliness, their animal instincts, their lack of, wisdom and thought. So, that's the way they were seen, and it doesn't make sense to put women as the original witnesses to the resurrection, unless, of course, they were. That's just what happened. And the men didn't even believe them in the story. Just goes to show. Now, those are some of your reasons to think that the legendary hypothesis isn't true. Now, the mythical hypothesis, the problem there, and even most scholars don't buy the mythical hypothesis. Even Bart Ehrman just released a new book, Did Jesus Exist? And Bart Ehrman very much defends the legendary hypothesis. And I recommend listening to what he has to say on this. But because he actually takes it seriously, even though he's not a Christian. He doesn't, he's a legendary guy. But the myth hypothesis is just absurd. I mean, if you look, they claim that the story of Jesus is just like the story of Horus or Hercules or something like this, and the problem is it's not at all. And the parallels, they'll tell you, there's this parallel, pretty much to resolve any questions you have over the myth hypothesis. Please do this. You have the internet. Read the original pagan myth for whatever it is that you're looking up, whether it's Horus, whether it's Krishna. Just read the story of them, and then ask yourself, was Jesus a ripoff of this? Furthermore, Jews took their ideas very seriously, and Jesus was claiming to be the Jewish Messiah, and it's a very different type of figure. And this is a Jewish context, and it's very important to understand, they're not necessarily going to draw from pagan myths. They weren't really that influenced at the time by those things, but nevertheless, the pagan myths are all radically different. And people will give you a list of similarities. I hate to break it to you, but a lot of times you read those lists of similarities, and they're bold-faced lies. There's no way around saying that, but so don't believe some list of similarities, even if it's in like a major documentary or something. Just go to the original sources and look it up for yourself, and you'll see. And then that takes us back to the liar, lunatic, Lord thing. And C.S. Lewis's point was like, Jesus obviously wasn't a liar because he went to the cross and died. So, I mean, he obviously believed what he thought. When I say, what, is he crazy? He doesn't seem like a crazy guy, does he? He seems like a guy who's got a head on his shoulders. So, was he crazy in saying that he was God? Well, he never really sinned or did anything inconsistent or he stuck to the story, and it all kind of fit and made sense, and he was in touch with reality the whole time. He didn't do anything that contradicted obvious reality, which is typically what crazy people do. That their stories run into problems, their nuttiness. So that leaves you with the Lord hypothesis, that he really was God, he really did rise from the dead, and all that. All of this talk in this video doesn't really prove that Jesus is God or that he rose from the dead, defeating evil and all that. It simply makes a case that it's likely to be true, but it does not prove it. And that's something that's important to keep in mind. So, with that said, I refer you to other videos where I go through what the Bible gives as the way to look for evidence to tell if it's really true. Because as Christians, we're called to believe it with sincere, pure faith. So, anyway, hope you found this video informative and enjoyable. Thank you for your time.